Good afternoon. I'm Larry King, a two-year resident here at Laurel Lake, and it is my pleasure to introduce Jack Spelman, who was born and grew up in Cleveland, and he's been part of our Veterans Project here, where we have our veterans tell some of their stories. This is another aspect of that to get this into the national level. So Jack, as a young naval officer, was part of the Normandy invasion, and now I'd like to let him tell his story of how he was part of that invasion. He will probably start with how he got into the Navy and how he got to Normandy.
Thank you, Larry. This is a Operation Overlord that Eisenhower created, and I happened to be able to participate in it. I was a student at Bowling Green State University when the attack on Pearl Harbor occurred, so I enlisted in the Navy, and I had to graduate within 2 years, and upon that I went to Columbia University for 90 days and became what is known as a 90-day wonder. After graduating from Columbia, I went down to Little Creek, Virginia for training in the amphibious activities. In March, I was moved on to Norfolk, Virginia, where I caught an LST number 77, in which we crossed the Atlantic in the 96 ship convoy, which was one of the largest convoys that occurred during the war. An LST is a landing ship tank. They are approximately 300 feet long, 50 feet wide, and the speed is 7 knots, which is very slow. But that is the speed of the convoy as we crossed the Atlantic, and it took us 28 days to cross the Atlantic. When we approached the Rock of Gibraltar and went into the Mediterranean, that evening we were attacked by ME-106s, and they did destroy one destroyer escort ship and damage several others, but did not sink them. However, one ME-106 was shot down. Once we got into the Mediterranean, we stopped at Bizerti in Palermo, where I caught LST 327. From there on, we went up to Cardiff and Swansea, Wales, for reconditioning and adding a few machine guns on our tank deck. From there, we proceeded down to London docks until June the 6th, where we loaded up and proceeded on with Operation Overlord, which was D-Day. That evening we left the London docks and went down the Thames River, the White Cliffs of Dover, and picked up other ships and proceeded on to our objective, which was, and some ships went to Normandy. Our particular ship went on to Sword Beach, which was the English and Canadian side. However, the most amazing thing in my life was the morning of this, when we looked at, and the sun rose, and all we could see is, as far as you could look to the right or left, was ships. There was a movie, The Longest Day, recently, which they showed. They said there were 7,000 ships, and 4,000 were supply ships, 3,000 were consisted of battleships, cruisers, destroyers, destroyer escorts, and other type of ships which would aid in the invasion. Our LST was not supposed to go ashore until H+16, as there were other supply ships, but there were also, the shore had mines, hedgerows, and a lot of damaged steel.
Jack, excuse me, what were you carrying?
We were carrying personnel.
Okay.
And a few small vehicles. I read I kept a diary, and it said I spent the night in a small boat looking for a place for us to land in the shores at the Sword Beach, but I do not recall that at all. However, we did go in the next day and load the troops in our, beside the personnel, the small vehicles. Then we went back to London and reloaded and made many trips to, well, I say many. I should say we made probably 5 or 6 to Normandy. And then we were fitted with rails on our tank deck, and railroad cars were our cargo for a short while. We went into Cherbourg. On the 13th trip, well, one trip, we did leave from London to go into Cherbourg, and we were just beyond the White Cliffs of Dover. I don't know if you've ever seen the White Cliffs of Dover, but they are really a sight. Even the black pitch of night, you can see the White Cliffs of Dover. But with any kind of a moon, they really shine. I'll never forget them. But anyway, while we were alongside the White Cliffs of Dover, I noticed, while I was on the con of the ship, I noticed tracer bullets going back and forth, and then there was an explosion. An merchant ship ahead of us was torpedoed by an E-boat. Now, an E-boat is quite similar to our American PT boats, and they were quite prevalent in the Mediterranean. There wasn't much we could do because we didn't turn on any lights, but we could hear some personnel who were in the water, and they were asking for help. We did rescue two of the sailors that were on the merchant ship. The next occasion was the 23rd of August. We were coming back with about 7 other LSTs when I was on the conning tower, and we struck a mine, and it was a real disaster, and the 27 of our crew were killed, and 21 were badly injured, loss of legs and arms, and we radioed the LST ahead of us, the 346, to come to our aid, and which they did. They put some small boats in the water and rescued some of the sailors that were in the water.
Mm-hmm.
Then we proceeded on. They towed us into Southampton, and the ship, of course, was severely damaged, and it was 6 months later. It was towed back to the United States and sold for, for salvage. However, my next assignment was to join a group of about 10 officers and go over to Germany to assist in small boats or something, to take the army across the Rhine River. Each officer had about 10 men in several LCVPs, and we had one LCM. We flew from Paris to Germany in Admiral Kirk's plane, and in a convoy taking the LCVPs to the Rhine River, we were attacked by 88s, and we were not used to that type of activity in the Navy.
Infantry
Yeah,
officers.
right. And we did have Army uniforms on. We discarded our Navy uniforms in Paris, and we're in Army uniforms. Anyway, my station was the extreme north end of the Rhine River. It was a town called Wesel, W-E-S-E-L. They pronounce their W's like with a V, Vessel. Anyway, I tried to cross the Rhine River. This was in March. This was supposed to happen in December, but the Battle of the Bulge delayed this thing until March. Anyway, we tried to cross the Rhine, but in the middle of the Rhine, the current was so strong that the LCVPs were unable to cross it. But the Army did bring some speedboats into the. Somehow they got a hold of some speedboats and got lines across the river. And it was very shortly that the Army engineers had had 2 Bailey bridges built, and they were very secure. And the Red Army number 1 went across into Germany. We remained on the Rhine River for until April. That was March and April, to the end of April, and we could see on our side of the Rhine River, they were not the minesweepers had covered the land pretty well, so they were. But on the west side of the Rhine River, there were occasional explosions from the German people walking around the area there, and the mines would detonate.
Jack, could you go back just a little bit and talk a little bit what you did in July and August?
Yes,
between D-Day and and August,
yeah.
when you hit the mine, what were you kind of doing?
Well, I spent quite a bit of time on the LST 327, but there was a date there in June when I was assigned to the USS Woodward, which was a merchant ship, but it was stationed about 2 miles offshore of Normandy. And this was a ship that was repair ship. It was also a ship where LCTs, landing ship tanks, would come alongside and get fresh water or some supplies. And we had a doctor aboard, and we had a Navy captain, and 4 or 5 officers were also aboard. And I think I was aboard the Woodward for about for about a month, and the English Channel would get rough, and even our anchor would not hold. We had to start the engines up and go against the tide. So that was the. That's what I did until, of course, the LST was disabled, and then I was in Weymouth, England. We were in Weymouth, England, in November, supposedly to go into Germany on December, but that didn't happen until we stayed in Weymouth, England until March, and covered that. And then the after duty on the Rhine River, which was very close to the end of the war, I was sent on to, our 10 officers were sent back to Paris, where we were supposed to pick up our clothes, but all our belongings and everything we owned had been broken into and stolen. So we were issued new uniforms. From there we went to Southampton again to wait for be deported back to the United States, and we were waiting this for a ship to take us back, and we waited. We were stationed in an English school, which had a gym, ping pong tables. It was sort of like a YMCA, and I remember I was playing ping pong with this side story that playing ping pong with my friend Lieutenant Pelgrin, and a young ensign came alongside, and he had on his white shirt and black tie and shiny shoes and a gold stripe on a real gold on his sleeve, and he sort of wanted to break in our ping pong table, and I told him to sit down for a while. Anyway, my partner Frank Pelgrin, I was playing tennis with, he looked at me. He said, "Jack, don't you know who that is?" And I looked again at this young ensign. I said, "No, I don't recognize him. Who is he?" He said, "That's Johnny Lujack." And Johnny Lujack was a quarterback that, after the war, that played for Notre Dame. Then he went on to play for, he's an All-American, went on to play for the Chicago Bears.
Right.
So I thought that was a good side story.
What was your, I forgot to ask you, Jack, what was your rank during this time?
I was a Lieutenant JG.
Okay.
And
you had the con of a ship as a Lieutenant JG.
Yeah, right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Well, I would say we had about 50 enlisted men aboard, and about 6 officers, and most of the officers were Mustangs. They were enlisted men prior to the war, but they were, like, the captain was a chief boatswain mate. He was made captain, and but they had a lot of sea duty, and they they were good sailors. But our 90-day wonders, like myself, I'd been out on Lake Erie, but I didn't know nothing about the currents and tides that the oceans. For example, I know at D-Day our ebb tide was 24 feet, and the way these LSTs worked, we would go before going in ashore, we had an anchor off the stern that we would drop out about 500 yards and then go ashore, because the tides, we'd be landlocked if we were broached on the shore. If we didn't do that, then after the load had been displaced, well, then they had a winch on the stern which would pull in the anchor and pull us off the beach.
Off the beach, right.
Yeah. But
now, you made a number of trips back and forth to the beaches.
oh yeah,
Did you take any fire during any of these trips?
No.
No? Okay.
no, the only thing, our ship, the LSTs, I think we had 40 millimeters on the stern and 240 millimeters on the bow. 40 millimeters on the bow, but I don't think we ever fired at anything. I mean, but the D-Day was the most impressive thing. That we were when we arrived at D-Day on the beach. We were out about 2 miles, but we were alongside of a British cruiser. And when this cruiser, the cruiser would just keep firing for, I think, 24 hours. And the noise of all these ships firing, but this cruiser would actually shake our ship up when they would fire, and they kept firing. But there were also rockets. All these ships it was just an unbelievable sight.
Hmm. Jack, where were you on VE Day when the war ended?
Oh, I was in San Francisco. When we sort of a fortunate thing happened when we came back on this Liberty ship. We passed the Statue of Liberty, and we're coming in New York Harbor. And a tug pulled alongside with several naval officers, and one was a wave. And one of the officers that had been on the Rhine River with us said, "That's my sister." And anyway, she came aboard with the other officers, and we introduced us, and she said, "Where would you like to go?" And, "You got to be kidding." We said, we couldn't believe this. She said, "No, seriously, where would you like to go on your next duty?" So I thought, well, I'd never been out of Ohio. I'll take San Francisco. And Frank Pelgrim took Detroit, and Bob Jacobs, and a friend of mine, took San Francisco also. Three of us went to San Francisco, Reggie Booth, and we had about three large barracks at Treasure Island there,
Right.
And that's where we were when the war ended. Yeah.
You had a story that you didn't tell, but I'd like you, if you feel like telling it. You had a run-in with an officer on the Rhine. Remember that, where something happened and he wanted you to do something?
Oh, well, I don't know whether this.
It's 70 years, Jack.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
think there'll be
72 years.
72, right? I don't think there'll be any problem.
Well, when I arrived at the Rhine River, that vessel at the north end, I had I think about 10 men, and I thought, where are we going to eat, or where am I going to look for food and so forth, or housing, and they said, well, this Army officers, well, you can eat with us. Well, hell, they were there for about a day until they got across the Rhine River, and they just moved into Germany. and then we had a lull when there was no Army person, there was nobody. But so what do we eat? You know, and we had a commanding officer that well, he was he was living in another location in a home with
a Fraulein?
A Fraulein. And I never, finally one day, after about 2 weeks, I came down and walked along the Rhine River, and here's this Jeep and this commander and a warrant officer. And we had a few words, and I went back to the schoolhouse. We had a schoolhouse there where one officer was there continuously, and there must have been 1,000 skis there, long skis that they had stored in the schoolhouse. But I was in the schoolhouse, and I wrote up my report, and I sent it to this commander, and then he sent me back to the river with a tent and some supplies and so forth. And one night it was pitch dark, and one of our men had found a guitar, and we were playing and singing songs and so forth, and all at once the flap of the tent opened up, and in walked this young. I thought he was a soldier at first appearance. He had khaki uniform on, but no insignias, just khaki, and he was an attractive-looking young man. And he said, "Do you mind if I join you?" And no, we sat down. He was singing. And he said, "Well, here's a song that I just sang in London." And so he sings, "Don't Fence Me In." And we'd never heard the song before.
Right.
And he had a tremendous voice. And he sang along with us for a while. Then he left, and Johnny Desmond is who it was.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. But later on, I think, along the Rhine River, there weren't any Army personnel around there. How he ever discovered our tent and we'd be singing, it was strange what he was doing there. I didn't hear him. He must have had a Jeep or something but anyway, that was the experience we had with Johnny Desmond. Yeah, that was, yeah.
Now when go ahead.
That's about it. Yeah.
Now, so when did you muster out, and where?
Well, I mustered out at San Francisco.
Okay.
In about, I think in February, was that? Yeah, February '46. Mustered out, and I came home to my wife. I had a daughter, Jackie, but it was a problem finding housing when you came back at that time, and I finally found housing through my Sunday school teacher in Brea. And Brea was a project. Actually, it was near the bomber plant, and the housing was for the employees of the bomber plant. But after the war was over, they didn't need more bombers, so the housing became open to veterans. And I think I was there for about 4 years, and I built a home in Brea, and went to work for Swift and Company, calling on hotels and restaurants in Cleveland. And but then I stayed in the active reserve,
okay,
which was, and I was called back to go to Busan, Korea in 1952, and I was over there for 14 months as a crypto officer, and we were stationed aboard another LST, which did not move. It was secured to a pier, and we did crypto messages for 14 months, and that was it's like being a telephone operator, I think, because all we did was worked on the crypto machines.
Right. So you were managing enlisted men who were getting the messages, decoding them.
Right, decoding them.
Or coding, yeah.
Decoding them all.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So you were in 14 months in Korea.
Yeah. And then I came home and went to Washington and resigned from the Navy because well, over in Europe, along the Rhine River, I mingled with quite a few Army officers, and they thought we were going to have a war with Russia. They said, well, I mean, that was the talk. So I stayed in the reserve, but I got out after I got back from Korea, and that was so that was a story.
Have you stayed in touch with any of your buddies?
Larry, they're all deceased.
Well, but
yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
For a few years. Did
Oh
you
yeah,
stay
yes, I did. I saw Bob Jacobs was we were together in England, then together in Germany, and then in San Francisco, and he married a young lady, and anyway, Hamilton, Peg Hamilton. Anyway, her father was a CEO of Hamilton Gear Company in Richmond, Indiana, and after I came back from the Korean War, I went with the Cadillac tank plant and with General Motors, and I was a buyer with steel products. One time I had a salesman come in my office, and he said he's from Richmond, Indiana, from Eaton Automotive Gear. Eaton bought out Hamilton Gear, and I asked him who the CEO was. He said, it was Bob Jacobs.
That was your friend?
My friend. So I went out to Richmond, Indiana, and visited with Bob and his wife. And, but he passed away long. He had a set of polo ponies and everything. He was, but Bob passed away, and Peg,
Well, Jack, is there anything special that you could share that you haven't? I mean, that's a great story.
Well, I think the only thing I could think of was the Johnny Desmond story and the Johnny Lujack stories were two occasions. But I mean, there was many things, but it's been 72 years, and I kept a diary, and I read the diary, and some of these things I don't ever remember, even in the diary that happened. But,
well, I hope you'll make your diary available to your family and get it transcribed, so for future reference, it'll be part of our historical record.
Yeah.
Your family, at least, historical record.
Yeah, that would be very, very nice, and I appreciate that. That would be nice for I'd like to. It's a funny thing. When I came home after the service, I don't think we ever talked about it until recently.
I know, it's hard to get you guys to talk about it.
We never talked about the service or what we did. And in fact, I was awake all night last night thinking about renewing some of the things and wondering that happened, and well, just the D-Day and the activities we had a fellow I went to midshipman school with. When we assembled for D-Day, everybody wondered, well, am I going to come out of this or not? Because the Germans were well fortified, but several of the officers shot themselves. They shot themselves in the foot to eliminate from going in on D-Day. And those are the ones I knew, but I don't. I mean, whether it happened on a large scale, I don't know. But
my reading says it did not happen on a large scale, but it did happen.
No, it did happen.
Right.
It was. I mean, that was the greatest show on earth, I thought.
Well, Jack, I think this has been terrific. I really appreciate you sharing again your experiences, because they're one of a kind. There aren't many D-Day veterans left, I'll tell you that.
Yeah,
and you guys did a fantastic job.
Yes, it was the greatest, like I said, the greatest show on earth. The Operation Overlord was. But the funny thing was, Normandy was to the east of where we landed, and Normandy had the cliffs that the men had to climb up with.
Right.
And whereas Sword Beach was like Cedar Point, only it did have gun displacements there, and they had, of course, the shelling from the I think the ships were destroyed, but I could see the gun displacements there, but they didn't have to climb up anything. They just went ashore and marched on. Whereas the Normandy, Utah, and Omaha Beach, they had to climb up a cliff almost.
Utah was flat, but Omaha was tough. They had to go up the. Have you been? Did you get back there?
No, I never went back to see what it was like.
Well, Jack, thank you very much. It was a great.